Here's the website or the web page that we're going to build today. So we have a title bar that changes when you hover over it. We've got pictures, we've got video.
Hi
There's the
everybody.
video.
So in this lesson we're inserting
And
video and other media into our web
that's
pages.
just a sample video that I made just for this.
Fourscore
And some audio. Well, I had to make some
audio.
audio. We have different styles of text. We've got links. We've got an embedded YouTube video
Hi, my name's
of the
Mike
last
Nolan,
lesson.
and over the course of the next
We've got
few
multiple
videos,
pages on this website. And we go back to our page, and there is the one that we built on the last lesson. So let's get started building a website. So here's where we were last time, and this is the web page that we had named Index. Now, if I hadn't mentioned it before, Index is where the server directs you when you type in a web address. So that's going to be your landing page. So we're going to change this to lesson 1, and we're going to add in a different index. We're going to make this a multiple page website. So we're going to start with this template here, and this is the basic template that I showed you last time, and we are going to set this up as the main landing index page for our website. So I just made a copy of it, and I'm going to name it Index, and then we get to work on it. And this one's going to be very simple. All we're going to do here is put in the title, add a couple of links, and we're going to put that in an ordered list. So one's going to be to the lesson 1 that we already did, and eventually we'll add a link to lesson 2 that we're about to do now. And we can check and make sure that link works the way it should. So we go back to our template again to build our page for lesson 2. And we'll do the exact same thing we did before, starting with adding a title. And we'll call that Media Styles and Layout, because that's what we intend to cover here. And we'll go ahead, and since we've established that page, we'll go ahead and make the link to it. And label it lesson 2. And that's what that looks like, and the link works. All right. And yeah, even though it's not supposed to read that in between those comment bars, it does anyway. So we'll get rid of that. Reload it. There we go. Our tab says the right thing. Okay. Recapping what we did, we talked about the multi-page website, and we used the template to start our web pages. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about organizing the files for your website. So the next thing I want to mention is that it's a good idea to have a separate folder for your media, your pictures, your videos, and audio, and it's common to call that assets. Inside our website folder, we have our HTML pages for Index and the 2 lessons. Now inside the assets folder are the media that we're going to insert. So I've got an image, I've got a little MP4 clip, and I've got an audio clip that we're going to insert into here. So for the image, we're going to use an IMG tag. The IMG tag is different from other tags in that it does not have a closing tag. It ends with a slash. So to point to our image, we're going to use the SRC, stands for source, attribute, and that's going to be the address of the image that we want to insert. So we'll insert it just like that. We'll save it and reload it, and there's our image. Well, it's a little big. So let's go back and resize it. So to do that, we're going to add a width. We'll make it 300 pixels. And let's reload that and see how that looks. Okay, that's a lot more like it. When you specify the width, it's going to automatically adjust the height to make it proportional. And you could also adjust the height and it'll automatically give you a proportional width. But be careful, if you adjust both the height and the width, you could end up with something a little bit skewed or squished. Now we're going to add a video clip to our page, and to do that you're going to use the video tag, and that one, unlike the image tag, has an open and close tag, and the source is going to be a separate tag, the source tag. So it looks a little bit like this on your web page. You're going to have your video open tag and video close tag, and in between you have your source, and that's going to be, just like in the image, it's going to be the address to the video clip. And mine's called sample.mp4. And we'll save it, reload it, and there you go. Well, it's not a moving picture yet. You have to have a way to start it. So we'll go into that. So to do that, you add controls. And we'll save that and reload it. And now you have a little play button there.
Hi everybody. So in this lesson we're inserting video and other media into our web pages.
Stop it. Go. There you go. We got a video. Now the size of this video doesn't seem to fit our web page. So just like with the image, you can specify the width or the height or both, but as always, be careful when you're specifying both because it may become out of whack. So there we go. It's the same width as our image.
Hi everybody. So
and it works as advertised. You might want to have something besides the first frame of the video show up on your page before you start playing. For example, I made this title and saved it as a JPEG. And the way you would do that is with the poster attribute, and you put poster equals and then the address to the image that you want to use as what will show in the space of the video when it's not playing. And also that works for printing as well. Now the audio, you put that in the same way as video, and you can add an attribute of controls or autoplay, but be very careful with the autoplay. For example, because it will play automatically until the user hits the controls. And you can do the same thing with video. For example, the autoplay attribute and the video tag. And we save that and reload. And there you go. Let's stop those. Another thing I want to show you real quick about audio, if you take out the controls attribute, there's nothing to display on the web page. So all it was a control to start and stop the audio. So when we reload that, there's nothing there, but since it's on autoplay, you'll hear the audio, but there's no way to stop it. So it's yet another reason to be very conservative with using that autoplay attribute. Another attribute you can put in here is the loop attribute on audio and video, and those do what it seems like it would. Whenever it gets to the end of the clip, it starts all over again. So yet another thing to be very conservative with, the autoplay, the loop, leaving out the controls. Those are some of the things that I hate when I get to a website, and probably most other people do too. So just doing a little example of what happens when you do the loop. It gets to the end, and then starts all over again. And there you go. So put the loop on the
brave men living and dead who struggled
there in that.
Hi everybody.
And we'll just skip over to the end.
That's our sample nation.
Get close to the end, and there it restarts.
So in this lesson, we're inserting
Fortunately, there's controls there, so we could stop it if we wanted to. We just covered image tags, video, and audio. I'm going to show you another way to embed a video or an audio clip onto your web page using YouTube. So I'm going to go to the index page and edit that. And under the link for lesson 1, I'm going to grab, go to YouTube and grab the video that we recorded for lesson 1. And there's a way to share that. There we go. So we go to the share button, click embed, and it gives you a snippet of code. So just highlight it and copy it. And then we'll paste that directly into our code here. So I'm going to put that right below the link to lesson 1. Give it a BR so it's on its own line. Paste it right in. We'll save that, reload the page, and there it is. And you can resize that just like anything else. Now we're going to start getting into some really fun stuff, styles and layouts. And I'm going to start with text styles. So for example, we've got this text here. And if we wanted to make it red, bold, italic, we could go into the element that the text belongs to and add a style attribute. And so you would put in the property, and color is text color, and we'll make that red. And the font weight, we're going to make that bold. And the font style, we're going to make that italic. Then we save, go back to our web page, reload it, and there you go. Change the style of that text right there. Another way to do that might be a little bit more efficient is in the style tag in the head. That way you're not having to put the style in every element individually. So to do that, you put a class name, a class attribute, and in the head you would have the style open tag and style close tag, and you'd have the selector. For classes, those start with a period, a dot, and then the curly braces, and then the property and the value of the property. So there we go. So we've made that a highlight. And also, one of the handy things is you can use a span tag for just handling a span of text within an element. You would nest that inside the element itself. And there's yet one more, even more efficient way to do it. So like I showed you before, if you wanted to apply a style to just one element, you can add the attribute, the style attribute, inside the element. Or if you want to do it to the whole page, you would put style tags in the head of the page. But if you want to do your whole website, your multiple web pages, you can do it in a separate style sheet instead of putting the styles into each individual HTML document. And the way you do that is you create a separate file with a .css suffix in the file name. So we go ahead and we create our style sheet here, and for simplicity we'll call it style.css and save it. And for our element here, we went ahead and put a class tag on there. Now, to make sure this works properly, you do have to have the link tag in the head element, and that's going to be link, and then the rel attribute is going to be style sheet. to let the browser know what it is. And href is the location of your style sheet. And if I haven't mentioned this before, these are all relative folder locations. This being in the same folder as this web page, it's just going to be simply style.css. Now, make sure you pay attention to the syntax on this. It's always going to be the attribute and then a colon, the value, and a semicolon. Otherwise, it won't work. Now, for fonts, not every browser is going to have all the same fonts. So it's a good idea to have a specific font and then a generic one, such as sans serif. And you can just put in anything. I made this up, and it'll default to the second one. And there we go, back to copperplate. For your layout, you want to make use of block elements such as the div or the nav, and those are recognized by the browser as having a defined space location inside the web page. So I'm going to create a div here, and I'm going to give it the class primary so that we can attach CSS styles to it. And just to identify it, I'll just say this is primary, and we'll see what it looks like without styles on our web page. Reload, that's our primary div right there. So we're going to go to our style. We're going to add a selector for primary, open curly brace, close curly brace, and property background color is going to be light blue. And let's see what that looks like. Save, reload, and there we go. Notice that it goes all the way across the page, and it's the same height as the text. All right, so let's do some more stuff with that. Let's make it tall. (200 pixels). There we go. Now let's add some width to it. Make it an even square. Reload that. There you go. And this is something that you can experiment with on your own quite a bit. From here, let's nest another div inside of primary and see what we can do with that. Let's call that secondary. That's a good name for it. This is secondary. Save and reload and see what it looks like on our page. And it just inherits all the same properties as the parent. So let's add some style for secondary. And we'll make him pink so that he's a different color. And we'll see what that looks like. All right, so just like primary, it's as tall as the text, and it goes all the way across the parent element. And let's add some height and width to him. And we'll make that half the size of the primary element. Okay, so he's right there in the middle. Let's see if we can move him around. Now, to do that, you have a position property. Positions can be relative, absolute, or fixed. But they only really work if the parent element has a position property as well. So if you put that in there, it goes to the top of the body element. So if we make the parent element relative, there we go. And we've covered up the text for that. So I don't really want that. Make it bottom 0. Move it down to the bottom. I think we can do something else with it too. Move it all the way to the right. And that's an offset 0 from the right, so that takes it all the way to the right edge. Now if we want to move our primary element around, we have to change the, or add the property to the parent element. In this case, it's going to be the body. So there we go. Now we said fixed. That means that it stays in the same place in the viewport and everything else moves around it. So here you have the primary stuck in one spot right there, and everything else rolls around behind it. And we could move it a little bit from the left edge, and there are different units of measure. You can use pixels. So here we got 25 px for pixels, and we will see how that looks. Save and reload. And that moved it 25 pixels to the left, from the offset from the left edge, and 2.5 inches. There we go. 2.5 centimeters. M, that's the width of the normal width of a letter. And if you use 0, you don't need any units. 0 is 0 no matter what the units are. And you can use percent. So percentage of the viewport, for example. So we could make it 100% across. Or percentage of the parent element. In this case, it's the body, so it would be the width of the viewport. Now here's something interesting. The text spills out from the div. So there's a few different ways we can handle that. So you attach the overflow property to it, and you can call it overflow hidden. Reload that, and that just cuts it off. Or you make it overflow visible, and it'll spill out of the div, just like it was before. That's the default. And then there's a couple of other interesting things you can do with it. Let's make it really narrow, and maybe even add a lot of text to it, so that so you can really see what's going on there. Now if you use the scroll property, it'll give you a little scroll bar. And I'm going to grab some of that dummy text that we used from lesson 1 and stick it in there, so we'll have a lot to scroll up and down. There you go. So you get an extra little scroll bar for all that text. Another option, we can make the overflow auto. So hypothetically, it only gives you the scroll bar if you need it. But even if you just made it scroll, if there's nothing to scroll, it won't give you a scroll bar. But you can't see the text that's behind it. So let's make this a little less opaque. We'll save that. Now we can see behind it, and notice that secondary inherits. So you can see right through that. It inherits the same opacity. So even if we tried to give it an opacity of 1, completely opaque, you can still see through it. So there's another way to define the opacity on these, and that's using RGBA. So red, green, blue, and opacity. So you give it 4 numbers, and so we want to give it the same number. And HTML, your browser recognizes a lot of color names. And so let's try and get the same color that we've already used, but we're going to put it in RGB. And I can never remember these, so I have to Google it. All right, here we go. Where's our light blue? Come on, light blue. Must be down here with the L's. There we go. There are a lot of color names. There we go. There's our light blue. 173, 216, 230. So to do an RGB, and inside of parentheses. So red, green, and then blue. Anywhere from 0 to 255. Zeros are no color, 255 is full. So that is the same color, same opacity. We haven't changed that. Let's get rid of that. Okay, now we're just regular opaque. And we're going to make this an RGBA. And the A, the last one, is going to be our opacity. We'll save that. Now we can see through it, but secondary does not inherit this. So keep that in mind when you're doing your layouts. So here's another interesting thing we can do with backgrounds. We could take that out and put an image in there using the background-image property. And the value of that is URL with parentheses and quotes, and then the address to the image you want to put in there. So I'm going to use my same old random food picture, and we'll put that in there. Now, always remember to put the semicolon after the property value, otherwise it's not going to work. There you go. So the size, that's a little big, so maybe you want to squish it down a little bit. So we use the background size property, and we'll use the cover. And there's a few different values you can use in background size. So that's the one we're going to use. There we go. That looks like a picture there. And it still covers up all the stuff behind it. So let's see what we can do with that. Yeah, maybe there's an option we can make it contain. No, that doesn't look right. Let's keep trying some different things to see what it does. Let's see here. Change the background size. Let's make it specify a size there. Okay, got that. That really doesn't look good. Okay, we'll go back to cover on that. And that still covers up the top part of our text there. So maybe let's add a div to contain all the text or all the content that'd be below that image. So there in the body, let's just add a div and maybe call it main content. Give it an ID. And then we'll copy everything and put it inside of that div. So copy paste, let's move the indents over. The indents help you keep track of the hierarchy, what's inside of what element. All right, we'll save it, reload it, and it looks exactly the same because we haven't really changed anything. We just nested that inside of an element. So let's select that property. Now for IDs, instead of a dot that we did with classes, we'll do a hashtag, a number sign, and then the name of the ID, open and close curly brace. That's our selector for main content ID. So we'll make that position relative to where it normally would be, and we'll offset the top by the height of that primary div. And there we go. It slid it down 100. So now we see everything. So we have a top title bar that stays visible no matter what the position of your page is. So that might be a nice place to put maybe the title of our page. And if this were for a commercial or other kind of organization, you could have your theme colors or whatever, that a design that ties the whole web page together. This is where you can really use your graphic design skills. So let's just change this up a little bit. Let's get rid of our placeholder. This is primary, this is secondary text. And we'll make that headline, and this will be the title for the page. Lesson 2. Well, it doesn't fit in there. So let's make secondary bigger and have a good contrast. So 255, 255, 255 is white background. And so and you can make that partially transparent, so you have a background that you can see the picture through the background. And let's move it around so that it covers the whole picture. There we go. So nice little semi-transparent headline there. Now let's do something a little bit interesting. We're going to add a selector, a conditional selector. So a secondary when the mouse pointer hovers over it. We'll make the opacity 1. That'll override what we had before. So save and reload. Well, no, we found out earlier opacity does not override RGBA. So we'll change that. Let's make that a medium gray. When the numbers are all the same, it's different shades of gray. And 0.1 opacity, so it'll be almost clear. And we'll change the text to white. So that's what that looks like. And maybe instead of doing that, we could make it completely opaque. Change the opacity to 1 instead of 0.1. And we can save that and reload our page. And then test that out by hovering the mouse over it. And that's what that looks like. So we covered making a top bar, but you could do the same with a bottom bar. So if we wanted to make this a bottom bar instead of a top bar, let's go into our CSS and change top to bottom. So the offset from the bottom is going to be 0 pixels, inches, whatever. And let's see what that looks like without changing anything else. All right, so it's going to cover up, we still have that gap at the top where our bar was, and it covers up a little at the bottom. So let's see if we can do the same thing as far as offsetting the main content and see how that works. We'll save and reload the page and see how that looks. Well, okay, so our content's all the way up at the top, but we still cover the bottom a little bit. So we're going to do this a little bit differently. Instead of a bottom offset, we'll put in a bottom margin, or margin bottom. And that will accommodate some space for the bottom bar. And that way, when we reload it, we'll see all the content. So if you wanted to have a bottom bar, that's how you do it. Besides the top or bottom nav bar, a lot of web pages have a side nav, a nav bar on the side, usually the left side. So let's take a crack at making one of those. So I've created a div at the bottom of the body element. I'm going to grab some content to paste in there. At this point, it doesn't matter where we put it, so I just put it at the very bottom of the body element for now. We'll save and reload that just to see what it looks like. And right now you can't see it because it's at the bottom, covered up by our bottom nav bar. But if we were to make that a little bit transparent in our properties, then we'd be able to see the content that we put in there, just a link to home so far. So we go to that. Make it somewhat transparent. And we'll save it and reload it. There we go. There's our content right there. But you can't click on it because it's underneath that other element. So I'll talk about the Z-factor a little bit later, the three-dimensional aspect. But for now, let's move this around. So to do this, we'll go to our style sheet and add some styles for our nav bar. And here we have it on the right at the very top. We'll make the background color maroon so it stands out. And it's a little hard to read, so let's make that text white. And now, even though we have it as white, the text still shows up as blue. That's because the default color for links is blue. So to remedy that, we're going to add another selector. So in the navbar ID, all the A's, all the anchors are going to have the color white. So we'll save and reload that. And let's see what that does. Now our text is white inside the maroon. So let's keep going with this. And we'll make our nav bar, let's give it some width. Okay, now we've got the width that we want, but it still looks kind of weird. We want it to really cover up some height. So we'll add some height to it now. Make it 100% of the viewport window. And let's save and reload that. Okay, there we go. We got a sidebar. Now, this sidebar covers up the bottom bar. So that may be what you want. It might not be, but we can change that. We have control over this. So when your computer reads this, when your browser reads it, it's going to read from the top to the bottom of your HTML page. So it'll lay down the top elements first, or the elements that are come first in your HTML, and then lay the next ones over it, just like you were laying down sheets of paper. So we can move this up a little bit and then save that and reload it, and that changes the orientation of your three-dimensional layout. And another way to do this would be to add a z-index. So it's like your Cartesian coordinates. You got your x-axis, your y-axis, and your z-axis. So the z is the three-dimensional. So you can change that and make it give it the dimension that you want. So we had the z-index, and you can make this positive or negative. So if you make it negative, it's going to go underneath one layer. So normal, the default is 0. If you make it -1, it'll go underneath everything that's 0. If you make it 100, it'll go over everything that's 99 or lower. So now that we've got our navigation bar set up the way we want it, let's put some content in it. Let's put some links in there. And we can do this in the form of an unordered list. So we'll put some list items in there and do it just like that. Make it LI with an A. And we've got our things. And let's reload that. And we've got a nice little list. But it's got the bullets on there. So you don't really need the bullets. So let's change that up a little bit. So we're in our style sheet, go back to navbar A, and we'll do another selector. So inside the ID navbar, all the unordered lists, and that is going to be list style and none. So we'll save and reload that and take a look at our page again. And there you go, the bullets are gone. Now that list style is really handy. You can change that up. You can make it, for example, circle. Let's hollow circles. You can take a look at that and experiment a little bit with this and see what we come up with. So if you like that, you can keep it that way. Or bullets. Now bullet is what we started out with. That's the default value for a list. What else could you put in there? Square. We'll save and reload that. There you go. Got some squares. So for these, let's change it back to none. And we'll go from there. And let's take a look at that. It looks pretty nice. But what if we want to move the nav bar to the other side? Let's see how we're going to do that. So right now we have it right offset 0. Let's change it to left offset 0. And see what that looks like. Okay, well, well, they got a collision there with the text. So we'll have to fix that somehow. So we'll set up a left offset for our main content div. And this is the ID main content selector. And we'll just put in left. And since it's 100 wide, we'll make it offset at 150. So move it all the way over and give it 50 more pixels to give it a little bit of margin in between the left nav and the text there. So let's save all this, reload it, see how it looks. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now that we've got our left side nav bar set up the way we want it, let's move our banner from the bottom to the top just by changing that value there from bottom to top, 0, and saving it. And then to make room for the left-hand banner, we're going to need to position that down, the height of the banner. So that's going to be 100 pixels. And we will save that and see how that looks, and voila. But now we can't see the very top of our text in the main content, so we're going to need to move that down a little bit instead of up. So we had margin bottom, so we'll just do a top offset of the height of the banner, and there you go. And that looks like a website to me. So we've got that top banner. It does a little something. We've got links on the left side and content in the middle.